Germany's current economic troubles stand in stark contrast to the country's remarkable recovery in the decades following World War II. The Wirtschaftswunder, or economic miracle, is one of the most striking examples of post-war reconstruction in history. After the devastation of the war, in which Germany's infrastructure, industry, and cities were heavily bombed, few would have predicted the speed and scale of its recovery. However, with the help of the Marshall Plan, a US-led initiative providing financial aid to war-torn European nations, Germany began its journey toward becoming an industrial giant. Between 1950 and 1960, Germany's industrial capacity grew by over 150%, and its economy boomed thanks to a combination of factors: investment in infrastructure, a well-educated labor force, and a focus on manufacturing high-quality goods. The German government, with the backing of Western powers, pursued policies that favored free market capitalism, low inflation, and high productivity, laying the groundwork for decades of economic success. The manufacturing sector, particularly the automotive, machinery, and chemical industries, quickly became the backbone of the economy, and Germany's exports surged. This period of rapid growth transformed Germany into one of the world's leading economies. By the late 20th century, it had solidified its position as the largest economy in Europe and the third largest in the world by nominal GDP, behind only the United States and Japan. The country's industrial prowess was symbolized by global brands like Volkswagen, Siemens, BASF, and BMW, which became synonymous with quality and reliability. Germany's industrial sector was so competitive that it consistently ran trade surpluses, exporting more goods than it imported, a trend that has continued for decades. One of the key drivers of Germany's economic success has been its export-oriented model. Unlike the United States or the United Kingdom, whose economies are more reliant on domestic consumption, Germany's prosperity has been built on its ability to manufacture and sell high-quality goods abroad. By focusing on industries where it had a competitive advantage, such as automotive, machinery, and chemicals, Germany became the world's third largest exporter. In 2022, it exported roughly $2 trillion worth of goods, making up nearly 50% of its GDP. Germany's ability to maintain a trade surplus, a situation where it exports more than it imports, has been a significant contributor to its economic growth. This trade surplus was particularly large during the 2010s, peaking at nearly 8% of GDP, a figure matched only by China. German manufacturers enjoyed strong demand from global markets, especially for luxury cars, industrial machinery, and precision-engineered products. However, this heavy reliance on exports also made the German economy vulnerable to external shocks, such as fluctuations in global demand, trade disputes, and economic downturns in its key trading partners. Germany's main export markets include the European Union, 53% of exports, the United States, and China. Any slowdown in these markets can have a profound impact on Germany's economy, as we will explore later in this chapter. A major factor contributing to Germany's current economic downturn is the energy crisis triggered by the war in Ukraine. For years, Germany pursued a strategy of securing cheap natural gas from Russia, believing that economic ties would lead to better relations between Moscow and the West. Former Chancellor Angela Merkel's government was a strong proponent of this approach, even as Eastern European countries and the United States warned of the dangers of becoming too reliant on Russian energy. Before the war, 55% of Germany's natural gas came from Russia, much of it delivered via the Nord Stream pipelines. This reliance on Russian gas allowed Germany to fuel its industrial base with cheap energy, keeping production costs low and boosting its competitive edge. However, this strategy backfired spectacularly when Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. Faced with the need to cut off funding for the Kremlin's war machine, Germany had no choice but to sever its energy ties with Russia. The immediate consequence was a spike in energy prices. In 2022, the cost of a megawatt-hour of electricity soared from an average of $30 to $40 to $267 at its peak. This surge in energy costs hit Germany's industrial sector hard, forcing many companies to either raise prices or reduce production. Inflation soared to 7.9% in 2022 and 5.9% in 2023, further squeezing consumers and businesses alike. But the real damage was done to Germany's industrial backbone. Energy-intensive sectors like chemicals, steel, and automotive manufacturing, which form the core of the German economy, were suddenly faced with unsustainable costs. BASF, one of the world's largest chemical companies, announced it would scale back operations at its massive Ludwigshafen plant, which consumes as much natural gas as the entire country of Switzerland. Instead, BASF began shifting investments abroad, notably to China, where energy prices were more manageable. The energy crisis has caused permanent structural damage to Germany's industrial base. Many German companies, especially in energy-intensive industries, have found it increasingly difficult to operate domestically. High energy costs, combined with increasing taxes on fossil fuels, have pushed these companies to move their investments abroad. This deindustrialization trend is alarming because it threatens to undermine the very sectors that have driven Germany's export success for decades. For example, the automotive sector, which employs over 800,000 people in Germany and contributes billions to the economy, is facing increasing competition from abroad, particularly in the electric vehicle (EV) market. German car makers like Volkswagen, BMW, and Mercedes-Benz have been slower to adapt to the transition to electric vehicles compared to competitors like Tesla and Chinese brands such as BYD. While Germany still dominates the premium car market, its global market share in EVs is shrinking. This is not just a short-term problem. The energy crisis has revealed deeper vulnerabilities in Germany's economic model. The country's reliance on fossil fuels, combined with a slow transition to renewable energy, has left its industries exposed to fluctuations in energy prices. Although Germany has made significant investments in renewable energy, with over 50% of its electricity now coming from renewables, the transition has been costly and slow. The decision to shut down nuclear power plants as part of the Energiewende, energy transition, has also been controversial, with many Germans questioning whether it was the right choice, given the current energy shortages. In response to the energy crisis, the German government took unprecedented measures to cushion the blow for consumers and businesses. Between March and November 2022, the government spent an average of $1.5 billion per day to cap energy prices and prevent further inflationary pressure. This massive public expenditure pushed Germany's debt to record levels, with the government borrowing $449 billion in 2022 and over $500 billion in 2023. For a country traditionally known for its fiscal discipline, these levels of debt are extraordinary. Germany has long prided itself on maintaining balanced budgets, and the concept of Schuldenbremse, debt brake, has been a cornerstone of its economic policy. However, the energy crisis forced the government to abandon these principles in order to prevent an even more severe economic collapse. But this level of borrowing cannot be sustained indefinitely. As Germany emerges from the immediate energy crisis, it faces the challenge of managing its public debt while also addressing the long-term structural weaknesses in its economy. Rising inflation, combined with high levels of public spending, has created a difficult balancing act for policymakers who must now choose between fiscal austerity and stimulating economic growth. Germany is facing a demographic crisis that threatens to exacerbate its economic troubles. The country has one of the lowest fertility rates in the world, with women in Germany having an average of just 1.6 children. This is well below the replacement rate of 2.1 children per woman, which is needed to keep the population stable. As a result, Germany's population is shrinking, and the proportion of older people is rising rapidly. This demographic shift is creating serious challenges for the labor market and the broader economy. By 2035, Germany is projected to lose as many as 7 million workers as the baby boomer generation retires, and there aren't enough young people to replace them. This shrinking labor force poses a major threat to Germany's economic competitiveness. Without enough workers, industries will struggle to maintain productivity, and businesses will face increasing pressure to raise wages in order to attract talent. While higher wages may seem beneficial for workers in the short term, they could ultimately make German companies less competitive on the global stage. especially in sectors that rely on low-cost labor, such as manufacturing. The problem is not just that the population is aging, it's aging unevenly. The largest segment of Germany's population is currently in their 50s, and many of these people will soon be retiring. However, the cohort of young people entering the labor force is much smaller. For example, while 4.1% of the population is aged 50 to 59, only 2.4% of the population is aged 15 to 19. This imbalance is creating a significant labor shortage, and the situation is only expected to worsen in the coming decades. In an attempt to address this labor shortage, Germany has turned to immigration as a solution. Over the past decade, the country has accepted more than 1 million immigrants annually, with a record high of 1.5 million arriving in 2022, largely driven by the influx of Ukrainian refugees. Germany has also become home to large communities of Turkish, Syrian, and other non-European immigrants, many of whom have filled gaps in the labor market, particularly in low-wage sectors such as construction, cleaning, and caregiving. However, immigration is not a panacea for Germany's demographic problems. There are several challenges that come with relying on immigration to fill labor shortages. First, many of the immigrants who have come to Germany in recent years are from Eastern European countries, such as Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria, which themselves have low birth rates and shrinking populations. As these countries develop economically and raise wages, they will become less likely to send workers to Germany, reducing the pool of potential immigrants from within Europe. Moreover, immigration from outside Europe has become a contentious issue in German politics. The refugee crisis of 2015, which saw hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers, mostly from Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, enter Germany, sparked a political backlash. While Chancellor Angela Merkel's government initially welcomed refugees with an open-door policy, this decision led to the rise of the far-right Alternative for Germany, AfD party, which has capitalized on anti-immigrant sentiment to gain electoral support, particularly in the eastern parts of the country. The public's attitude toward immigration has also shifted. A 2023 survey found that 54% of Germans believe the disadvantages of immigration outweigh the advantages, a significant increase from previous years. Many Germans, particularly in rural areas, feel that the country is struggling to integrate immigrants, and they are concerned about the strain that immigration is placing on social services, housing, and the education system. The political debate over immigration has further complicated efforts to use it as a solution to the labor shortage. While the government has made some efforts to attract skilled immigrants, such as offering fast-track work visas for high-demand professions like IT and engineering, the overall approach to immigration remains a divisive issue. This has led to calls from both sides of the political spectrum for stricter immigration controls, making it more difficult for Germany to attract the workers it desperately needs. The economic consequences of Germany's aging population are already being felt across various sectors. One of the most immediate impacts is the increasing strain on the country's social welfare system. Germany has a generous pension system, but as the number of retirees grows and the working-age population shrinks, the financial sustainability of this system is in jeopardy. According to government projections, the cost of maintaining pensions at their current levels will rise significantly over the next few decades, potentially leading to higher taxes and reduced benefits. In addition to the pension system, the healthcare sector is also feeling the effects of an aging population. The demand for healthcare services is increasing as the population ages, particularly in areas such as elder care and chronic disease management. However, there is a growing shortage of healthcare workers, particularly nurses and caregivers, which is putting pressure on hospitals and nursing homes. This labor shortage is driving up wages in the healthcare sector, but it is also leading to burnout among existing staff and a decline in the quality of care. The labor shortage is not limited to healthcare. It is affecting nearly every sector of the economy. A 2023 survey by the German Chamber of Commerce found that half of German companies are struggling to find workers, with the problem being particularly acute in construction, manufacturing, and engineering. These industries are vital to Germany's export-driven economy, and the inability to find enough skilled labor is hampering productivity and growth. Furthermore, the demographic decline is contributing to the broader issue of deindustrialization. As companies struggle to find workers, many are relocating production facilities to countries with younger, more abundant workforces. This trend is particularly pronounced in the automotive and machinery sectors, where German firms are increasingly shifting investment to Eastern Europe, China, and the United States. While this may help companies maintain profitability, it is leading to a gradual hollowing out of Germany's industrial base, which has long been the backbone of the economy. Addressing the demographic crisis will require a multifaceted approach. One potential solution is to increase the fertility rate by offering more support to families. The German government already provides various incentives for families, such as parental leave, child allowances, and subsidized childcare. However, these measures have not been enough to significantly raise the birth rate. Some experts argue that Germany needs to do more to create a family-friendly work environment, such as offering more flexible working hours and improving access to affordable housing for young families. Another solution is to reform the pension system to make it more sustainable. This could involve raising the retirement age, increasing worker contributions, or reducing benefits. However, such reforms are politically sensitive and could face significant opposition from both retirees and younger workers who are already struggling with high living costs. In the long term, Germany will also need to invest more in education and training to ensure that its workforce remains competitive in a rapidly changing global economy. This includes expanding vocational training programs and making it easier for workers to acquire new skills in high-demand sectors, such as digital technology and renewable energy. By upskilling its workforce, Germany can mitigate some of the effects of the labor shortage and remain competitive in key industries. Finally, while immigration will remain a necessary component of addressing the labor shortage, Germany will need to improve its integration policies to ensure that immigrants can contribute fully to the economy. This includes offering language training, simplifying the process for recognizing foreign qualifications, and addressing the social tensions that have arisen in response to immigration. A more inclusive and integrated approach could help alleviate some of the political backlash and make immigration a more viable long-term solution to Germany's demographic challenges. For decades, Germany has been seen as the de facto leader of the European Union, thanks to its economic strength and political influence. As the largest economy in Europe, Germany has played a central role in shaping EU policies, particularly in areas such as trade, finance, and regulation. Its leadership was especially evident during the Eurozone crisis, when Germany, under Chancellor Angela Merkel, led efforts to stabilize the European economy through a combination of bailouts and austerity measures. However, Germany's leadership within the EU is now being called into question. The country's economic slowdown, coupled with internal political divisions, has weakened its ability to lead effectively. Moreover, Germany's policies have not always been popular with its European neighbors, particularly those in Southern and Eastern Europe. During the Eurozone crisis, many countries such as Greece, Spain, and Italy felt that Germany's insistence on austerity measures was too harsh and contributed to prolonged economic hardship in the region. The refugee crisis of 2015 further strained Germany's relationships within the EU. Merkel's decision to open Germany's borders to more than 1 million refugees was praised by some but criticized by others, particularly in Eastern Europe, where countries like Hungary and Poland refused to accept large numbers of asylum seekers. This division over immigration policy has persisted and is one of the key sources of tension within the EU today. Germany's relationship with Eastern Europe has also been complicated by the war in Ukraine. While Germany has provided significant military and financial support to Ukraine, its initial reluctance to send heavy weapons, such as tanks, drew criticism from countries like Poland and the Baltic states, which feel directly threatened by Russia. These countries have pushed for a more aggressive stance toward Moscow, while Germany has sought to avoid escalating the conflict, reflecting its historical reluctance to engage in military confrontations. Germany's leadership role within the EU is also being undermined by the rise of populist and nationalist parties across the continent. These parties, many of which are Eurosceptic, have gained significant support in recent years, particularly in countries like Italy, France, and Hungary. They argue that the EU, under Germany's leadership, has become too powerful, and that member states should have more control over their own policies, particularly in areas like immigration and economic regulation. The growing influence of these parties has made it more difficult for Germany to push for greater European integration, as many of its proposals are met with resistance from nationalist leaders. One of the most significant geopolitical challenges Germany faces today is its energy dependency on Russia, which has been brought to the forefront by the war in Ukraine. For years, Germany pursued a policy of economic engagement with Russia, believing that closer trade ties would lead to more stable relations between Moscow and the West. This policy, known as Wandel durch Handel, change through trade, was based on the idea that economic interdependence would encourage Russia to align more closely with Western values and norms. Central to this strategy was Germany's reliance on Russian natural gas. Before the war, Russia supplied more than half of Germany's gas, much of it delivered through the Nord Stream pipelines. German industry, particularly energy-intensive sectors like chemicals and steel, benefited from the relatively cheap and reliable supply of Russian gas. The reliance on Russian energy allowed Germany to maintain its competitive edge in global markets, as it kept production costs low and ensured a steady supply of raw materials. However, the invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 exposed the flaws in this strategy. As part of its efforts to support Ukraine and punish Russia for its aggression, Germany, along with other Western countries, imposed a series of economic sanctions on Moscow. One of the most significant steps was the decision to stop importing Russian oil and gas, effectively cutting off Germany from its primary energy supplier. The consequences of this decision were immediate and severe. Energy prices in Germany soared to record levels, and the country was forced to scramble to find alternative sources of energy. Germany has since turned to countries like Norway, the Netherlands, and the United States for liquefied natural gas, LNG. But these sources are more expensive and less stable than the pipeline gas that previously flowed from Russia. As a result, German industry has been hit hard by rising energy costs, leading to reduced production, layoffs, and in some cases, the relocation of manufacturing to countries with lower energy prices. The energy crisis has also highlighted the broader geopolitical risks of relying on authoritarian regimes for critical resources. While Germany's economic engagement with Russia was intended to foster stability, it has instead made the country vulnerable to geopolitical shocks. The war in Ukraine has shown that economic interdependence does not necessarily lead to political alignment, and that relying on a hostile power for energy can have disastrous consequences. Germany's relationship with the United States is another key aspect of its geopolitical strategy. As a member of NATO, Germany has long relied on the U.S. for military protection, particularly during the Cold War, when it was on the front lines of the standoff between the West and the Soviet Union. The U.S.-Germany alliance has remained strong since the fall of the Berlin Wall, but recent developments have put strain on the relationship. One of the main sources of tension is the issue of defense spending. Under President Donald Trump, the U.S. repeatedly criticized Germany for failing to meet NATO's target of spending 2% of GDP on defense. While Germany has promised to increase its defense spending, it has consistently fallen short of this goal, raising concerns in Washington about Berlin's commitment to the alliance. The war in Ukraine has intensified this debate, as Germany's military has been slow to modernize and provide significant military support to Ukraine. In addition to defense spending, the U.S. and Germany have differing views on how to handle the rising tensions with China. While the U.S. has taken an increasingly confrontational approach toward China, particularly on issues like trade and technology, Germany has sought to maintain a more balanced relationship with Beijing. This is largely due to Germany's deep economic ties with China, which is one of its largest trading partners. German companies, particularly in the automotive and machinery sectors, rely heavily on the Chinese market for both exports and investment. However, this balancing act is becoming increasingly difficult as tensions between the U.S. and China continue to rise. The U.S. has pressured its allies to reduce their economic ties with China, particularly in sensitive areas like technology and critical infrastructure. Germany, which has long championed free trade and open markets, is now facing a dilemma. Should it align more closely with the US, its traditional ally, or continue to engage economically with China, a key trading partner? Germany's recent efforts to de-risk its economic relationship with China reflect this balancing act. In a 40-page document released in 2023, the German government outlined its strategy for reducing dependence on China in critical sectors like energy and technology. The goal is not to decouple entirely from China, but to diversify supply chains and reduce the risks associated with over-reliance on a single country. However, this strategy is fraught with challenges, as many German businesses are deeply intertwined with the Chinese economy and are reluctant to scale back their operations in such a lucrative market. Germany's military capabilities, or lack thereof, have become a major concern for both its European allies and the broader NATO alliance. Historically, Germany was one of the most formidable military powers in Europe, but following the devastation of World War II, the country adopted a more pacifist stance, focusing on economic recovery rather than military strength. For decades, Germany relied on the US and NATO for defense, allowing it to underinvest in its own armed forces. This underinvestment has come back to haunt Germany in recent years. The war in Ukraine has highlighted the shortcomings of Germany's military, which is widely regarded as underfunded, under-equipped, and poorly prepared for modern warfare. In a 2023 interview, Germany's defense minister admitted that the country's armed forces were barely able to defend themselves, let alone contribute meaningfully to NATO's collective defense. One of the main issues is Germany's low defense spending. Despite pledges to increase its military budget, Germany has consistently failed to meet NATO's target of spending 2% of GDP on defense. In 2022, Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced a 100 billion emergency fund to modernize the military in response to the war in Ukraine. However, progress has been slow, and much of the emergency fund remains unspent due to bureaucratic delays and inefficiencies in the procurement process. Germany's military weaknesses have serious implications for European security. As one of the largest and wealthiest countries in Europe, Germany is expected to play a leading role in the continent's defense. However, its inability to field a capable military has led to frustration among its NATO allies, particularly in Eastern Europe, where countries like Poland and the Baltic states feel directly threatened by Russia. These countries have ramped up their own defense spending and military readiness in response to the war in Ukraine, but they worry that Germany's lack of military preparedness could leave Europe vulnerable in the event of a broader conflict. Germany's military challenges are not just about defense spending. They also reflect deeper issues within the country's defense bureaucracy. The procurement process for military equipment is notoriously slow and inefficient. For example, it took the German military more than 5 years to resolve a legal dispute over the purchase of assault rifles. These delays have hampered efforts to modernize the armed forces and have led to widespread frustration among military leaders. Despite these challenges, there are some signs that Germany is beginning to take its military responsibilities more seriously. In 2023, the government announced plans to increase defense spending to 2% of GDP by 2025, and there have been efforts to streamline the procurement process and reduce bureaucratic bottlenecks. However, rebuilding Germany's military capabilities will take time, and it remains to be seen whether the government can deliver on its promises. The political crisis in Germany has reached a fever pitch under the leadership of Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Scholz, who took office in late 2021, has faced numerous challenges, from the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine to the ongoing economic recession and energy crisis. While Scholz initially appeared to be a steady hand, his administration has struggled to navigate these crises, leading to a sharp decline in public support. Recent polls show that only 28% of Germans approve of Scholz's performance, a record low for the chancellor. Much of the frustration stems from the government's perceived inability to effectively address the country's economic problems, particularly inflation, rising energy prices, and labor shortages. Scholz's government has been criticized for being slow to act, particularly in its response to the energy crisis. The reluctance to send heavy military aid to Ukraine in the early stages of the war further damaged Scholz's credibility, especially among Germany's Eastern European allies.